Oh, there we go. Welcome. It takes takes a moment. So, what we're looking at today, I'm calling it stepping out, stepping up, but it's the story of Jesus walking on water. And I was just saying to Colin, I actually found in preparing this morning, I pull the text together, I kind of read through it, transfer it over onto my into a PowerPoint that I can display on the screen. And I saw some things which I often reference when I talk about the walking on water, but I went back and looked at the text today and suddenly saw something I hadn't seen before. So from my point of view, it's been a nice kind of little fresh. Oh, that's a nice little moment just to see there. We'll come to that. So we've got 14 verses today. Oh, and Mike's here as well. Nice to have you, Mike. We were just saying everyone turned up late, so we're only just getting going now. So. So the actual text, if you remember, we've been looking at we had the feeding of the 5,000, which is kind of it was a culmination. There's a kind of a moment going on. Doesn't really happen in one verse, but as you kind of as we see in the kind of the flow of Matthew. As Jesus has sent out sent out the 12, and at that point, while they're being sent out, and the news then comes back to him as the 12 are still out there of the execution of John the Baptist. It seems that as we kind of put the flow together, that perhaps John has been executed before the sending out of the 12, although knowledge comes while the 12 are out. If that was the case, it would mean that. As they're out there and there are all these miracles happening, Herod is kind of hearing about all these things. It kind of feels to him like there's the spirit of John the Baptist is being resurrected or something like that, because it's been multiplied all over the place. And then when Jesus hears, he tries to draw away. As he draws away, the impact that has been had by the 12 going out and kind of raising news means that people spot him travelling by boat, and they kind of head round the coast. You remember this from last week. I'm just kind of setting the scene. They gather around Jesus after the day of teaching. Then there's the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And so this is the kind of the moment. So and following this, so this is verse 22. A lot of Bibles will have a word like immediately, and you got a lot. The immediately is often there in Matthew. Immediately. It's more the Greek word it's translating is kind of more and it's more of a sense of and then. It implies there's a flow, but the word immediate has much more of a kind of temporal contraction for us. So, if I say immediately, it's kind of snap, snap, snap. Whereas the actual kind of word just simply means there is a kind of a level connection, a connection between what happened here and what happened there. So I've just gone with and following this. It probably is pretty immediate. It's just sometimes I think when we read the immediate, it kind of rushes the sense in a way that isn't always the correct way of reading. It's much more that just, following on from this is direct connection. They fed the 5,000, and now, and there's something about this event which kind of flows out of. So now Jesus made the disciples to get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So before the crowd is fully gone, Jesus has already got them heading away from him. And after he'd sent the crowd away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. He was alone there as evening came. And while the boat was already far from land, it was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So I just want to kind of quickly, I'm going to pull back this little kind of map that I put up last time to kind of show the direction. So traditionally, the feeding of the 5,000 has been said to take place at Tabgha, and that's because when they set out towards Bethsaida on the other side, people are thinking east to west. Much more recently, it makes much more sense because actually Tabgha is not a desolate place, and actually the feeding of the 5,000 is a desolate place. To understand, it's actually probably a north to south, and so the other side is Bethsaida, kind of directly above it, but it's the other side of the bay. And that's is partly, I'm going to show you other things on the map, but I should put these pictures up last time. I'm sorry they're so bleached out. The problem is I have a filter on that removes the green background from the words, and it also takes all of the green out of my colour photos, so they kind of they end up as looking very black and white. So you can see in the location that's now understood to be where the feeding of the 5,000 is, you've got directly heading for the other side. There's Bethsaida. If you look down, you've got the map underneath, which I'm sort of in the way of. Let me just get out of the way. There's a little kind of ridge of mountains, which is the place where probably Jesus is going up to pray at this point. So during the fourth watch of the night, so he's gone up to the hilltop, the crowd have gone, he came to them treading on the sea. And I put a little asterisk there, because I just want to highlight something out of this passage, which I believe is deliberately there in Matthew, but it's made slightly more explicit in Mark, where we're also told that Jesus then intended to pass them by. I'll come back to that. Just want to kind of flag it. So during the fourth watch of the night, while they're there in the boats, they've headed off towards Bethsaida. There's a headwind against them. It's pushing against them. Not only that, if I quickly go back up again, if you look, the River Jordan comes into the Sea of Galilee from the north at around Bethsaida area, and the flow of water is also hard to work against. So you've got a double whammy. You've got the natural flow of the river that runs into the north of the Sea of Galilee, pushing the boat, and then you've also got this headwind because they're struggling against it as they go there. Let's come back. So it's in that place. Then suddenly, let's go back again. Sorry, the last verse of. While the boat was already far from land, it was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Yes, sorry, that's right. Yeah, so don't know why I went back to that. That wasn't. So then, during the fourth watch of the night, which I should have looked up actually, so I could tell you what time it was. But it's well after evening. Jesus has been praying. Jesus, i.e., he came to them treading on the sea. Now we often have walking on the sea. The Greek word is like making a path, which you often do by walking. So obviously walking is absolutely fine as a translation. But the reason I wanted to emphasise that it is a kind of literally a treading on this. If you go and look up in Strong's, you can see the word treading on as part of the kind of the understanding of the word. He's treading on the sea. When the disciples saw him treading on the sea, they were agitated. So you've got that phrase twice, treading on the sea, treading on the sea. They were agitated and said, it's a spirit, and they cried out for fear. And so Jesus spoke to them saying, cheer up, I am, don't be afraid. And I've put that I am in red because this is the first occurrence in Matthew's gospel of the little Greek, the Greek construct which doubles up. Ego and eime. So ego, I, and eime, I am. So I am is kind of quite literally it. Now that's significant. John's Gospel uses it all the time, and Matthew's uses it several occasions, because and one of which is in Matthew is him quoting back the Old Testament passage where God introduces himself as I am, and where it uses the same construct, I am. And so the I am is clearly, if you like, a divine reference. And this is the first occasion that it's been used in Matthew's Gospel. He's going to use it again on a handful of other occasions, and John will use it an awful lot. So there's the point where Jesus, I think, refers to I am good. So it makes that phrase, or I am the good shepherd, I think is Matthew as well. And the I am kind of construct, as I say, John uses quite regularly. I am the door, I am the way. But it's very kind of clearly understood as being a kind of a way of referencing the fact that there's something of the divinity of Jesus kind of coming out in this moment. So this is the first occasion in Matthew. And I just wanted to kind of draw out why, because again, in my understanding, Matthew's been written for a Jewish audience, and therefore he expects them to know the Old Testament. He expects them to know the scriptures, and so he expects something to be seen here, which if I just kind of flag on the meaning of the moment, if we go to Job 9, actually that should say 8 to 11. I just realised I've missed out the end. We actually get this he alone. So he alone is God here. So this is God alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. So we've got this same idea of treading and on the water. And the logic here is something you find in the Old Testament, which seems to be related right the way back to Genesis 1, where in creation there's a stretching out of the heavens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and the Spirit hovers over, and that there's something in the hovering over. There's something creative and something of the evidence of the Creator God in this kind of hovering over of the sea, the hovering over of the waters. And that gets picked up on a handful of occasions through the Old Testament, the idea of God treading on or walking on the waters. So the bit that I spotted this morning, which I had never seen before because I've flicked back, so if you go on from verse 9, verse 8, because you see I actually typed in just verse 9, 8, and then I looked in my Bible and suddenly realised that if you read on a bit, it says, were he to pass me by, or were he to pass by me, I wouldn't see him. Were he to go past me, I wouldn't perceive him. And that suddenly brings the whole incident much kind of closer to home. Because as I go back, if you look, I've got that little note there. During the fourth watch, he came to them treading on the sea. So that treading on the sea imagery, though it's written in Greek, has the same kind of concept that you find there in Job. And in Job, and in Mark's Gospel, it then adds that he's intending to pass by. And you go back to Job, where we've got one of the first references to the treading on the sea. It says, if he were to pass by me, I wouldn't see him. Were he to go past me, I wouldn't perceive him. And what we're going to see as we get towards the end of this passage is this becomes a huge revelationary moment, and probably a step forwards in the thinking and understanding of the 12 disciples of exactly who it is that Jesus is. So far as we've worked through Matthew, Jesus is kind of he's been somebody who first looks a bit like the ministry of John the Baptist, although John's saying he's going to go further, and that's piqued the interest of the disciples. And then Jesus has called them to travel with them, so he's now itinerant preacher, but he's also a miracle worker. The Sermon on the Mount, suddenly he's looking a bit like Moses with the Ten Commandments. So we looked at when we were looking at that passage, there are 8 blessings that are expected when the fulfillment of the law, and he lays out 8 beatitudes at the beginning of that sermon. So we've kind of gone on through in the feeding of the 5,000. He's giving bread in the wilderness, bread in the deserted place. So Jesus has been shown by Matthew's gospel to be both the Messiah, the son of David, it's an expectation in Jewish thinking, and the prophet who would come after Moses. So these are 2 key ideas from the Old Testament about key individuals, and now they're suddenly both being seen in the person of Jesus. But what's happening now is we're stepping up a level because now suddenly we're seeing the divinity of Jesus, and that's going to be expressed at the end of this. And we're seeing it with this very kind of clear reference, it seems to me, that in this passage in Job, where it's talking about making reference to the common idea of God stretching out the heavens, treading on the waters. Or the waters often symbolic of the kind of the chaos of life and so on. And then even the reference about him passing by, but actually there's something to be perceived here. There's something, a moment to be caught. There's something we want you to see. And Peter certainly leads the way in trying to see it. A little bit later on in Job, we get a similar thing. Have you gone to the springs that filled the sea, or walked upon the recesses of the deep? That's God speaking. It's kind of, again, making reference. Psalm 77, your way is through the sea, your path through the great waters. That's actually a reference to the way God has saved the nation of Israel, the way he created the nation of Israel, which was understood that the creation, it wasn't just a salvation, it was a kind of creative act, which is why it's kind of seen as the way that God divides the water in the days of creation. So the Spirit hovers over the water, and the water is divided from above, below, and then from to side as the land comes up. So there's dividing of the waters, pushing through, and so on. Seen as a creative act, seen as the salvation of Israel out of Egypt. It's understood as being something that belongs to God. It's part of his prerogative. So we're having a really powerful kind of theophanic moment. And I actually find it kind of quite useful and quite helpful to understand it in those ways. It's just on a personal preference kind of point of view, that I say it's personal preference. I think I find it quite thrilling, the concept, which you get in Philippians, of how he's laid aside the rights of divinity, he's laid aside those things for the sake of our humanity. And theologically, for me, as I've meditated on it, I see the importance of Jesus going through the crucifixion in his humanity, if I can put it that way. He comes out of it because he's divine, but actually he suffers it in his humanity. The suffering of Jesus is in his humanity. It's kind of like it's kind of it's mankind has made the problem, and it's therefore it's a man, because God doesn't change God has given mankind authority. Mankind abuses the authority, ruins the authority, but actually it's in his humanity that Jesus restores and re-brings those things together. So I take a strong emphasis on the importance of the humanity of Jesus in his mission. But there are a number of moments, and they are kind of peek through moments, where suddenly we kind of get the sense of translation and we see Jesus much more in his divinity. And I think this is a really kind of key moment. We're going to have others as we go through Matthew, such as the Transfiguration again. But here, this is something which is about the disciples grabbing a moment and understanding something that is now lifting their understanding of who Jesus is to a much higher level. So hopefully that's what I'm saying there. That's all making sense. And so answering, Peter said, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." And he, that's now Jesus, said, "Come." And having stepped from the boat, and actually, if again you look at the little green words, because I'm looking at a green screen, having is actually kind of stepped down from. He said, having stepped from. I dropped the word down, but it is a kind of a step down, and then he's going to get a step up in a minute. Having stepped down from the boat, Peter trod on the water to come to Jesus. So there's something now in the response of faith that Peter is having, which is almost overtaking him. The way I read this, it's kind of it's I don't think it's a kind of carefully, seriously worked through. It's almost in the moment where Peter's called out and Jesus has spoken something, and it hits him in a way that when the Lord asks you to do something, but it hits you with such conviction, it becomes like an instruction that you can't help responding to. As he steps down from the boat. But as he steps out, it says, feeling the headwind. I've used the word feeling rather than seeing, because although the word technically is seeing, if you look at it, can be used much more in a kind of the sense of apprehension, of comprehension or perceiving. So, and I just thought it's kind of feeling the headwind, feeling the wind. He was afraid and began to sink, and he cries out and said, "Lord, save me." You see, so we here he is using the word Lord. Which is not unusual, but it's very specifically here, I think, this kind of moment, because we're coming into a place of revelation and calling out for salvation. And so Jesus reached out his hand, took hold of Peter, and says, and he speaks these words. Now, the little phrase, "Ye of little faith, why did you waver?" We often put the word doubt in there. Someone was asking me the other day about I think it's probably in one of these sessions, about the role of the Passion Translation. Where I'm positive about the Passion Translation is what Brian Simmons has tried to do is very often that we've inherited a kind of rather religiously harsh way of reading the text, and so he wanted to try and reflect the kind of the breadth of the underlying languages that are being used in a slightly softer way. Because I remember I got the opportunity to talk to him about it. So while it's not a kind of a really good sort of study Bible, it's a very good inspirational Bible, in the sense of you getting the language of Jesus in a slightly softer sort of way. And this is a good place, because I often find that "ye of little faith," it sounds like it's a rebuke. Whereas in actual fact, Peter has just done something quite amazing, but actually feeling the headwind, it's kind of hard to maintain. The word that's translated there as little is often translated as few. It's kind of a handful. It's kind of limited. So I was tempted to put limited faith, but that there's a thing in me that doesn't want to kind of overstretch sometimes. But there's a kind of a sense of Peter has responded with the faith he has got, even though it's limited. He steps into the situation. Actually, in the buffeting now, he kind of loses and wavers. As I say, the word that we translate as doubt there is mental wavering. It's not the same as the word that's used sometimes translated as doubt, which is where you kind of act on your unbelief. It's a slightly different word. So it's a mental wavering. In that context where he steps out with the faith he's got and suddenly Jesus reaches out and grabs him, you're having this wonderful sort of metaphorical, symbolic moment of the issues around salvation as a kind of the understanding suddenly of not just Jesus is a good prophet. He's not just even a prophet that was prophesied about. He's suddenly seeing something much more divine in the moment. And in that place he calls out as he steps out in faith, realizes he can't do it in his own strength, calls out, "Lord, save me." The Lord reaches out and grabs him. And when they'd gotten into the boat, then the wind ceased, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And this little line is one of those moments we've got to recognize where it stands in the moment. This is a kind of a new level of revelation. It's a new understanding of who it is they're following. And probably Peter symbolically is standing for where they'll all be to some degree. They've kind of seen something. Jesus looks like he's going to go past them, but because Peter has acted in faith and stepped out, he's even discovered his own limitations in being able to really fully understand and comprehend what it is he's doing. But actually he's able to share that with the whole group. It probably becomes a bit of a metaphor for how they walk forwards into the birth of the Christian church, with the revelation they bring of the divinity of Jesus and their confidence in it. And it's all kind of packed around this moment as we've been kind of crescendoing up. Things have been ramping up, the authority that the disciples are walking in, but suddenly they've seen something which very unambiguously, there are a lot of moments in the Old Testament where there are kind of hints about dualities of it's a person or is it God? Is it a person or is it God? But the Old Testament always uses the idea of walking on water as being divine. The treading on of water is always divine. So they've seen something acted out. Most of the time we're seeing Jesus operating in his humanity, but every now and again the veil is kind of lifted. They get a glimpse of something that goes beyond it. So this is a miracle of miracles in one sense. It's not the only one in the Gospels, but it's different from what comes next, which we'll get to in a second. The last few verses, because it's more of a all miracles in one sense are a sign that points to the Lord, but some very specifically point to some very concrete thing. So this is more of a prophetic, miraculous sign than just a miracle that's good for somebody, if I can put it that way. Which, of course, if you're the person who receives the miracle, that's nice for you. But this is much more than that, if I can kind of try to get it across that way. So just into the final verses. Oh no, going the wrong way. Let's go this way. Oh no, I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Oh, okay, yeah, there we go. That's right. So it just this looks similar, but it's slightly different. So they've set off. I'm just showing the route that they've taken. They set off heading up towards Bethsaida. They've hit the winds and they've hit the flow of water that comes down from the Jordan. It's pushing them around. Jesus has met them on that journey, and then they start putting in towards Gennesaret, which is over on the other side. You shouldn't say, okay. So having crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And where the people of that place recognized him, they sent to all of the surrounding region. You see, so we can see that what's happened since Jesus has sent out the 12, the news has gone all over the place. People have followed him around, fed the 5,000, even after the storm. As soon as they start to recognize, they're not just coming to listen anymore, they're actually sending out to draw people towards Jesus. And so we're in many ways, what we're seeing happening here in Matthew is we're reaching the fulfillment of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. It's not going to last a huge amount longer because actually now the crowds are enormous, the knowledge has gone out. And so what's now happening is when the people of that place recognize, they're sent to the surrounding region, they brought everyone who was sick to him. Now, we've had occasions before where they're bringing everyone who's sick, but they're normally for a single town, like Capernaum. He heals the man in the synagogue and the word goes out and people around the town bring people. Now we're talking about the whole region. So they've landed. We've just gone through this amazing experience for the disciples as they see something new of the divinity of Jesus. Now we have this enormous crowd of people, far bigger. The trouble is we read a word like crowd, you have to kind of qualify it. There's a crowd that... Oops. Just hang on. I'm just going to mute everyone, I think. Hang on. Just do a... Okay, I'm just going to mute it. You can turn yourself back on, but I'm just muting there because we can hear some noise in the background. So, okay. So they recognise and they sent all the... We're qualified now by it being people from everyone who's sick in the whole region. And they're imploring him simply to touch the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were cured. So this, as I say now, Jesus is almost unable to move, which is going to frame as we move on. There's a kind of a natural break now in Matthew's narrative, and he goes back and starts to focus on the opposition to Jesus in the chapters that follow. But just in the way that very often in kind of Hebraic storytelling, but it's not just in Hebrew storytelling, you move forwards in cycles. You take your perspective from one person, you move forwards, and then you kind of roll back a little bit, and we get the perspective of the antagonism towards Jesus. But fundamentally, in terms of Matthew's flow, we're reaching this apex of the time in Galilee, and very soon he's going to move down towards the south. Although Matthew doesn't cover that in terms of events in as much detail as he does the ministry in Galilee. But that's all other stories that's going forward. So anyway, we come to a natural place to finish. Again, I always think I do these at such a fast speed, but hopefully, would anyone like to ask anything or make any observations on that text, or just wants clarification, or even sometimes just to express what you've seen out of it?
I mean, that thing about the treading was very insightful. From Job. So that was
yeah, and
that was a good insight there.
And it was the thing. That, go on, Joe.
Yeah, I'm reading the verse 10 as well. So from 8 to 11, we have tramples down the waves of the sea, and then in verse 10, it's who does the great things unfathomable and wondrous works without number, which seems very fitting also for...
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, there you go. It was probably... I probably skipped that because I was rushing to get the thing added to the... because I only spotted it while I was in the kind of moving the verses across. So. But yeah, no, I think it does. It's very good. Thank you, Joe. Anything else? Anyone else wants to observe or share?
I love the way that you brought out how much of a significant thing this was, expressing the divinity of Jesus.
Yeah.
Kristen, it's not something in the flow of reading it in the past. I've not really seen that as clearly.
No, well, I think that is the first moment where they say you are, they call him Lord and Son of God. They're suddenly, even in their language of him. And of course, that's going to be in a few chapters' time. It's going to be Jesus is going to ask them, and Peter's going to express it. But it's almost as if the revelation for him, the breakthrough, is coming at this moment, because he doesn't ignore the passing by. He does step out and kind of try to get his head round it. So, yep. No, well, I have to say I enjoyed pulling this one together because, I thought when I was walking the dogs this morning thinking about it, it was only when I got back and reread it and I thought, oh no, actually there's a lot more here than I'd realised when I was walking the dogs. So. Good. Well, if we're all done, when we started, the plan was to keep them all under half an hour, and as time went on, they spread out to the whole hour. But actually, this is quite nice to do them quite quickly. So it feels more like taking your lunch break than it does kind of a long session all day long. So Good.
That's very good. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you. Good. Well, in that case, what I will do is I will kind of say my polite farewells, and we'll stop the session. But it's been good to see everyone today. And look forward to seeing folks again next week. So I'll say goodbye then.
Bye.
Thanks then. Bye. Bye.
Bye.